So you are listening to the Charles Bonnet Syndrome podcast. This is episode 5. I am Shaimond Foy, and I have my co-host Eva Potts. And today we have a special guest. His name is Jonathan.Ward. Jonathan.Ward is the development manager of employment at Thomas Pocklington Trust in London. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So can you tell me a little bit about what you do in your current job?
Okay, so I guess I guess probably a potted history. I have worked with blind and partially sighted people for nearly 40 years. And the main thrust of all my jobs has always been to sort of teach and develop independence for blind and partially sighted people, and that's people of all ages. So I've worked with pretty much newborns all the way through to sort of people of 100 plus years. My current role is focused on employment, and my brief is to find ways of assisting people who are furthest away from work.
Okay. And I must say that I actually met Jonathan because I have a loved one of mine that has Charles Bonnet Syndrome. And I reached out to Judith Potts and from Esme's Umbrella. And I said that my family member wanted to find some more support. So they were going to Dr. Gary Cusick's weekly group that they have here for Charles Bonnet Syndrome here in the States, in the US. So then she told me to reach out to Jonathan because he hosts a bi-weekly group for people that have Charles Bonnet to offer support. So that's how I met him, and he does a great job with this group. And I was very grateful to find him. So can you talk a little bit about Charles Bonnet and when you first were introduced or found out about Charles Bonnet?
Okay, so probably I think the first person I ever, well, yeah, probably my first introduction on reflection was probably that I think that I had Charles Bonnet as a child myself. So I can remember probably probably somewhere around the age of 4, seeing hideous gargles and strange faces, and I'm guessing that probably coincided when probably I had some first visual disruptions in my central vision field. So I'm just guessing that that's probably it. So I can remember seeing horrible faces and things on the wall when I went to bed, and strange shapes and things. Um, yeah, and so that's probably my first personal sort of interaction. But as professionally, I remember going to see a lady, my first lady, independently. She just lost her vision. Like many people, she had a macular condition, so no central vision. It was all new there, way before the days of injections and treatments. And she was seeing what she described as fat ladies. So it was all very strange. I went to her house and she was saying, "Oh, I keep seeing these fat ladies. Who's there? What's going on?" But luckily, even then, we talked about on the training that I'd had, we had talked about sort of visual hallucinations and things. So I was able to sort of talk to her. And then throughout my career, people have just, it's gone on from there. People saw, well, quite a lot of fat ladies, fat men. Um, Ironically, a week later, after seeing her, I remember seeing a gentleman, again, had a central vision loss due to sort of retinal bleeding, and he was seeing grids. So he said, when I wake up in the morning, it's like I'm in prison, and I can see like jail cell coming towards me. And so within a week of my professional career starting, I'd already seen 2 people who had sort of Charles Bonnet symptoms, and then it's gone on from there. So I've pretty much seen someone with visual hallucinations every week of my professional career, really, until until Judith Potts asked me to start the group 3 years ago, during all the COVID lockdowns. Yeah. So
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. So you mentioned when you were a child, you actually were seeing some things, and you didn't know it was Charles Bonnet back then. So you actually have a visual impairment yourself?
yeah. So I also like to say, so I have an undiagnosed macular condition. So probably it could be something like Stargardt's, but it's not officially got that label. But it's very similar. So I'm not dissimilar to lots of the older people that I work with who get the sort of the macular condition. So for the last 50 years I've lived with no central vision. So I can see to move around, to get around the outside, but I don't recognise people, no faces, no detail. And every now and then, I do see do have the odd hallucination. My last one was we were on a holiday in a cottage, and I was getting banana. I think it was banana trees or something like that growing in the kitchen, which is really. But this is quite rare for me. But every now and then, in the car. So in the car driving down the motor, with my wife's driving us down the motorway, I quite often get like cliffs. It appears like there's large white cliffs each side of the motorway. So but it's fairly infrequent for me. It's fairly infrequent, but it does happen. So those are sort of last two examples.
Yeah, how did you cope with that? Because you said you were a young child, and then eventually you said it's not as frequent now. But how were you dealing with that before you knew what it was called, and did you share it with
Oh,
people?
I don't know. I think it's just like any child. I mean, I guess luckily, I was sort of I don't know, blessed with fortunate with very supportive parents, and I guess they supported me. Just at 4, they just put me back to bed. Took them, but it's only sort of when I started spending time with Judith Potts and Esme's Umbrella that I realised what was going on. It was just for a brief period in my childhood, and then and way before I started going to see optometrists and ophthalmologists and having my sight condition diagnosed. It was, pre any sort of diagnosis or anything. So it's part of my childhood really, and I guess it was just like any other childhood disturbance. And I was just lucky to be supported by my parents, really.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask, how old were you? Because, as we all know, looking at Charles Bonnet Syndrome and what we've learned about it, that it's indiscriminate when it comes to age, gender, ethnic background. Um, how old were you? Do you remember when you started experiencing CBS?
Well, I think it's only on backward reflection, but I think I was possibly under 5. So in that sort of probably that 3 to 5 bracket, where memories are vague.
Yes.
So certainly, yeah. So certainly preschool. So before you go to we go to school at 5 in the UK, and yeah, certainly before that.
That's so interesting to know because that's one of the components that's definitely missing with information because everybody thinks this is a condition for the elderly or for the senior population or the baby boomer population, and we know that it's not. And I'm so glad to hear. I'm sorry to hear that you had to deal with this, but I'm happy to hear that you're able to tell people that you experienced this as a child. When you were a child, how did you had supportive parents? How did you wrap your head around the hallucinations? How did you integrate them?
Well, it was just for a period, and it was just for a period when I went to bed, and I think I used to. So what I did, I guess what my dad did, he said, he got 2 toy soldiers and he put them on the shelf, and he said these 2 figures will protect you from anything that comes in the room,
Oh,
and that was enough. That sort of just so they'd been brought for me. So there were actually two Greek soldiers in in uniform, and only a couple of inches high, but they were just on the shelf. And they said he said these will look after you, and that was just enough to sort of to sort of put my mind to rest. So whatever came then wasn't really a problem because I knew there was someone in the room that would look after me.
interesting. Shimon, that speaks to. We had a support group yesterday here in the United States. We have them on Saturdays from 12 to 2 Eastern Standard Time here in the United States on Saturdays, and we were talking about how that fear factor tends to exacerbate the hallucinations, and it seems that your parents did the correct thing by putting your fear to rest. If you weren't
Yeah,
fearful, maybe they weren't coming in. How interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's all, and I wouldn't have probably even remembered until I was chatting to Judith Potts here, and we were just sort of chatting about it, and I just started to sort of reflect back on things that had happened to me, and just sort of just occurred to me what was probably going on.
By actually you being so young, your father could have just figured, oh, a child is a child, or this is just something that happens. Children have imagination. But if you would have been like 13 or 15, it could have been a different story. But it may have not because you had supportive parents. But that could have been why it played out a little differently in your situation.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, and I mean, the story continues because of you know, away from Charles Bonnet. That, I mean, we're talking back in the 1970s now. So when I had my eye condition, it wasn't diagnosed because the technology wasn't really there to see the changes in the back of my eye. So although my vision had actually dropped quite significantly, then the technology wasn't there, the changes weren't there, you know, to see that, to see what was going on. So that's why there was no diagnosis. So, you know, had I had a different set of parents, they might have said that there wasn't actually anything wrong with me. But actually, my parents believed me, and you know, and I was supportive with my education and things. But then when I got to the age of 20 or thereabouts, the changes were really significant, and it was clear to see. It was really clear. So um, yeah, so I was supported all the way. So I was just fortunate, I guess.
Yeah, so fortunate when we hear from people that have Charles Bonnet, and they say when they have a supportive loved one, it really makes a big difference. They're even saying, going as far as to saying, believing that they're seeing what they're seeing, even though it's a hallucination.
Mm.
Believe them. Don't ridicule them. Don't make fun of them. Don't say, it's nothing over there. It just, support goes a long way, and everybody's different. So the way that you support them is different. It's probably like the five love languages. If your love language is touch, and you spend quality time, and it may not really feel like you're being loved unless you touch the person or something. So it's probably similar with this and many other things. So that's so important. I'm glad that you had those supportive parents. I was curious. So you mentioned that in a professional setting, you mentioned how you found out about Charles Bonnet, but I don't remember how long ago that was. Do you roughly remember? Was
So
it?
yeah, so this was this. So we were talking about it, but I don't see. I guess we didn't. We used to call it in the UK. I guess it wasn't. We didn't call it Charles Bonnet syndrome until a bit late, probably 10 years afterwards. We called it something like non-visual hallucinations or something like that, so it didn't have the sort of the Charles Bonnet sort of syndrome label came later to me, but I mean, it was exactly the same conversation. It was exactly for exactly the same reasons. We used to talk about it to people, but we didn't call it Charles Bonnet. I think we used to call it something like a visual hallucination. So whatever without sight hallucinations. So it was a mouthful of a term. So I think Charles Bonnet is probably a much better term to sums it up really nicely. But yeah, so there was training on that, and I remember you just part of the training, a brief lecture as part of my course was all about the hallucinations. But no one ever actually said Charles Bonnet. I don't think he came into it until later. And probably in the 90s we started talking about Charles Bonnet.
Okay, okay. You're light years ahead of us in the UK. Well, in the UK, you're light years ahead of us in the United States because, as far as I know, there's no training about Charles Bonnet. There's a few optometrists and ophthalmologists that seen it in their literature and their books and their manuals, but it's not much information. It's just kind of like, on the side. So for you to be in the field that you're in and to have that training, that can go a long way.
When I say training, it was, you know, so we've got a couple of issues. So the training was probably an hour's discussion on these hallucinations, or maybe less, as part of an extended course around blindness and partial sight. So it wasn't a great deal, but it's just ironic that that short lecture has sort of led me, to think, to meet and talk to and support so many people over the years. Um, and I mean, we don't have, I don't think, maybe Judith at Esme's Umbrella has just started a training program. I don't think there's any formal sort of in-depth training for anyone in the UK. And the other thing that comes up time and time again, and you may have heard it when you've dropped into the group, is this issue of diagnosis. So I don't think anyone who comes to my group, or one person maybe, has had a formal diagnosis of Charles Bonnet. Nearly everyone in the UK is self-diagnosed based on the sort of information that they've had. So diagnosis is a real issue.
Wow, wow. Can you talk a little bit about the formation of the group and how you support people with Charles Bonnet on your biweekly support group?
Yeah. So what we found, and I guess it was during the COVID times, which we all remember so well. And what Judith Potts at Esme's Umbrella found was that people's because of anxiety, there seems to be a link between anxiety and isolation and increased hallucinations. So what she asked people to do across the UK, she asked for people to set up local groups and local organisations. Um, so we just set up I've been doing lots of Zoom groups about all sorts of things, and so she just asked us to set up a support group, and that was how it all started. Really, we just contacted people, explained that we were starting a group all about Charles Bonnet Syndrome. Would they come along? And people just been coming back every 2 weeks and just chatting and sharing. And we just found that chatting to people who understand, have a greater understanding, and understanding of what people are going through and what they're experiencing in their daily life has been quite supportive. So it's that idea of lived experience, and because, like you said, I think earlier, it's having someone to believe in you is so important. And if someone else is experiencing it, they definitely believe in you. So I think if someone believes you and understands it, so that's where it came. And then we just look at, just chat about all sorts of things, but also we just return to Charles Bonnet. And for some people, coming to the group once or twice is enough, and other people have been coming pretty much every other week for the last 3 years. So it depends on what people need and want from the group.
Jonathan, may I ask a question? And you may or may not have the answer for this. We're facing the same challenges here in the United States: lack of diagnosis, lack of belief in the medical system to give proper diagnosis, which is very unfortunate. We actually do have several people who are properly diagnosed. Um, in the UK, when someone presents with Charles Bonnet syndrome symptoms, are they is there treatment available? What type of treatments are you all seeing in the UK that work for people with Charles Bonnet syndrome? We're finding cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy are great avenues of treatment. What are you finding in the UK?
Well, I mean, yeah, I can only speak to my experience and the people that talk to me. Okay, so my general experience is that none of the people that have come to my group, and I just always stand to be corrected. I don't think anyone has been offered any of those treatments, particularly for their Charles Bonnet. I'm just trying to think of, no, I don't think anyone has been offered any of those treatments. Um, yeah, I may be wrong, but I don't think there's any. I know there's research onto formalized treatments and things. So I haven't heard anyone who's been received. I've heard of people having some drug treatments, and I'm not a doctor, I wouldn't want to go there with any answer. So I have heard people have been treated with drugs, and I don't know if that's always been terribly successful from what. But I can only give you anecdotal information from what people tell me, because I'm not in no way a clinician. So all anecdotal from me, really.
We face the same challenges here, Jonathan, and Shaimond would agree with me. Here in the U.S., I'm not sure about the U.K., but in the United States, mostly psychotropic medications are given to these individuals, and they increase their fall risk. They increase the hallucinations sometimes, lack of sleep. It's a real challenge, and I'm, God bless Judith Potts for bringing this to light. No relation, by the way. And we are not medical doctors or medical professionals either. But what we're seeing is that every time somebody feels that a new medication has been prescribed to them and it helps them for a little while, and then it either fails at some point or they get worse in with their mental health, anxiety disorder sets in, PTSD sets in, because sometimes, I'm not sure what your group is experiencing, but our group, we have everything from people who experience pleasant types of hallucinations all the way to nightmarish, um, inability to even cope sometimes with normal everyday activity, daily activity living, because they can't put those hallucinations into perspective. And that's understandable. To them, it's real. As caretakers, it's also a challenge. Do you also have a caretaker aspect to your support groups?
We have a little. I've been encouraging sort of as you say, caretakers to come along to the group where appropriate, and I guess for me, and I don't know, it's maybe a pun, but it's a bit of an eye opener, because that this issue that I'm facing at the moment is this issue of reality and people's individual reality, because and how you challenge it, and I haven't come up with a satisfactory answer, because if something is so real to a person, then it's real, and it's how how you deal with that. I think, as you say, as a caretaker, because I was actually I don't very often go and see people face to face, but I did go and visit someone in their home, and we were just chatting, and the gentleman I was visiting could see a dog, and he was actually getting very quite angry with his wife because she couldn't see the dog, and he couldn't understand why she couldn't see the dog, but obviously there's no dog there, and actually that was quite a and it's how and she's she had a real it was a real issue. There was no easy way to explain to this gentleman that there's no dog there, and how you're doing it, and it's causing a lot of stress really in their relationship. But there was no easy answer that I could see anyway, really. And just telling him again and again, it was almost, well, it felt cruel really, and a bit unnecessary to me. But I don't know. I don't know whether there's a better way of doing it. So this is sort of questions that come up really, and finding the best way forward is really tricky.
And what I'm finding is that CBS is different for different people. Some people deal with it with one way, and some people deal with it another way. For some people, they have a certain type of hallucination, and for other people, they have different types. And it's kind of tricky because there's no one size fits all, and that is definitely challenging. And it's going back to the treatments and any kind of solutions. I've spoken to ophthalmologists and I've spoken to other professionals and done some research myself. And I'm not a medical professional, but they say there really are no definitive treatments for it. Some things work for some people and they may work for a certain period of time and then they won't. But that can be discouraging. It definitely can be discouraging. But so a lot of people say, like Dr. Gary Cusick, maybe talk therapy is going to have to be it, and realizing you're not alone. Maybe someone can listen to something like this podcast, and realize, take one thing from it or get some hope from it. So it's definitely a challenge.
I on that note, I'm hearing the same thing everywhere. The lack of treatment. The caretaker perspective, and that's why I am hoping and praying that someone from in the medical community is listening to these podcasts and understanding that there is a need for treatment here. And one of the things that I feel would be beneficial for the person with Charles Bonnet syndrome and for the caretaker is a proper diagnosis, and then the doctor explaining to the patient and to the loved one, caretaker, family members, whomever's involved in their life, this is not an easy thing to cope with. Here are some coping mechanisms. Here are some methods of caretaking that we feel would work. First of all, believe the person. They're seeing what they're seeing, and then
Mm,
try to help them cope with the coping mechanisms that Dr. Fitch has set forward. and
mm,
and so diligently given, there's a laundry list of coping mechanisms. They don't work for everyone, and some work for some don't work, don't work for others. But I really believe that the medical community would start stepping up and taking this seriously and explaining it to the patient, explaining it to the caretakers, and
mm,
that's going to be the first step. Is just the awareness. I was explaining this to my oncology massage therapist the other day, and she looked at me and she said, "You know what? People need to wake up. This is ridiculous. This has been around since 1760. That's a long time for a medical condition, physiological condition now recognized by the World Health Organization to not be recognized. We do
mm.
need, they do need to wake up."
Yeah. So one of the things that we often talk about in the group is when you go along to your optometrist appointment, ophthalmology appointment, when you're first diagnosed with something like a macular condition, for example, you're asked lots of questions about your eyes and you're examined, but nowhere in that process are you asked whether you are seeing any strange or interesting things. That's not a question. It may be over there in the States, but certainly it's not routinely asked by any doctors or anyone. Your eyes are examined and your eye condition is explained, but no, as part of that assessment process, there's no, well, are you seeing anything, that you isn't real, or whatever. That's never asked. So
And we were actually hoping that that can start being asked, because if this affects at least 30 to 40% of people that have a visual impairment or are blind, then it would be good if they can do that. And I've actually printed some of the information out that was on Esme's Umbrella's website and took it to the doctor with my loved one, because I can explain things pretty well, but the literature explained it even better. And it was very concise and right to the point. And they said, wow, this is interesting. I hadn't heard of this. Thanks for letting me know about this. And who knows what they did with that information. So I like the fact that that Esme's Umbrella and Judith Potts has this information out there. One thing that's coming to my mind is, if you had an opportunity to, what would you want people to know about Charles Bonnet? Whether it's a doctor, whether it's someone struggling with it, I know that could be two different answers. But if you had an opportunity to talk, what would you want to say?
so for me, I would want to see, so I would want people to know that could be an issue right at the beginning of their diagnosis. So when they first start experiencing visual problems, not being able to, any whatever it is, glaucoma, diabetes, macular conditions, whatever the cause of their sight loss is, it would be great. It would be great if they knew that, there is a likelihood that they could possibly experience some degree of silent hallucinations. I think it would be just for people to know, and know that that is a normal part of losing your vision, or losing elements of vision, because we have people whose vision is actually, by the standards of people I work with, is actually fairly good. So that, people who borderline being able to drive, and they're starting to experience some of these sort of elements of sort of silent hallucination. So I'd like people to know really early on that this is normal, and actually they're not, for want of a better expression, they're not going mad in any way. They're not suffering from some sort of mental health condition that they have to keep secret, and they have to sort of not tell anyone about, and not take that burden onto themselves. Because I think, when you can't talk to someone about what's going on, that's not a good place to be. So if they know it's a normal part of sight loss, or part of the sight loss, it's probably a cliched, hackneyed expression, but part of the sight loss journey, if they think it's a normal part, then that's got to be a good thing, really, right at that early stage. So I guess whether the doctor or whoever, or just the patient, knows that it's a normal element, then I think that's got to be a good thing to do.
And I think that that's what you said is so spot on, Jonathan. When someone is experiencing sight loss on any level, there should be an assessment tool accompanying that appointment. And one of the things that Dr. Cusick is so diligently working on and hoping to develop very soon is an assessment tool. So we have an assessment tool for schizophrenia. We have an assessment tool for dementia, which is what people with Charles Bonnet syndrome are often misdiagnosed with, are those two
Yeah.
types of conditions. Very sad, because then the medications get thrown at them. The label alone is enough to destroy somebody's mental health. The anxiety sets in. The disbelief that they've got this type of condition. And as a disclaimer, and I'm not a medical professional, I'll keep saying that over and over again, and I'm not a doctor, but having Charles Bonnet syndrome does not mean you're not going to develop dementia. It doesn't mean that, you aren't subject to schizophrenia if you have a genetic condition, but it is a separate type of hallucination. And that's what we need, is that assessment tool also to accompany those ophthalmology appointments where people are losing their vision, because you're right. They think they're losing their minds, and they're not mad. And they're quickly, um, they disengage. They isolate themselves because they're so fearful. We have a support group member that did not tell her husband, her primary caregiver, for 5 years. And I would imagine my mom was about 5 years, maybe even longer, before she admitted what she was seeing. That's so sad, because that alone is, I think, again, I'm not a doctor, I would imagine would exacerbate the hallucinations. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with anything you've said. It's just that living with it and doing it all on your own is yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's just if you can break that cycle, that's got to be the first step really to improving lives of people with Charles Bonnet.
So if there's somebody in the UK that needs some help with Charles Bonnet, what would you recommend? What kind of services are available?
Okay, so I guess we're fairly fortunate because obviously we've got Judith and Esme's umbrella, but I think what we've also got a good awareness amongst the sort of all the because there's more than 200 sight loss charities in the UK, and I guess nearly every sight loss charity and um, I don't know what we have rehabilitation specialists in the UK, sensory workers, depending on, and I think nearly all of those, thanks in part to the work of Judith and others, and you know, there everyone has that awareness. I guess so. People can talk to people, you know, in the sight loss charity sector about Charles Bonnet. They can. I think the pathway is fairly clear into sort of Judith and others like her for that ongoing talking support. If they need medical support, if for people with, because like you say, everyone is different. So you've got people with, you know, once they know what's going on, they can develop coping strategies, or the people around them can support them. And but then we do have individuals whose hallucinations are so terrible, so frightening, that they need something more. The coping strategies aren't there, and it's for those individuals that I'm not sure that we have the medical pathways available in the UK at this moment in time. I don't want to be disingenuous, but I just don't think there's those that for those individuals, you know, where the talking and local support stops. Yeah. So and I have come across those individuals. Um, yeah, and I'm not quite sure where they go or who can support them.
And on that note, Jonathan, there are so many individuals who, the gravity of this is just so large. It's heavy because now there's recognition. Imagine how many people have been in psychiatric units, mental hospitals, thrown into assisted living facilities simply because family members didn't know how to cope or guide them. They didn't know what they were dealing with either. So they're thinking that being put into a facility was probably the answer. How about our prison systems? How many people were hallucinating when they committed crimes? So there are so many, the dynamics and the phenomenon surrounding all of this is just, it's overwhelming at times. And I know taking it one day at a time and taking a deep breath and trying to get a hold of it is the way to do it. But this is, we're talking about the UK. There's a foundation in Australia. We're talking about starting this in the US, but this is a global condition. I can't even begin to imagine the people that are in war-torn countries right now that are losing their vision suddenly and go into Charles Bonnet syndrome, and there's no help for them. Because how about all the soldiers that have gone to war and have been injured in, IEDs, or or vision loss from some other type of injury while fighting for their countries, and they come home and there's no treatment for them. They're afraid to say something because if you're a soldier in the United States, the fear factor of admitting that you're hallucinating can be detrimental to your career, and that's so sad because that should not be. But we're failing people with Charles Bonnet. Every medical system in the world is failing people with Charles Bonnet right now. We're not helping them. We're not creating a pathway to treat them, and pharmaceutical companies aren't looking at this. But I think that we've got doctors that are working very, very diligently. Dr. Fitch, Dr. Cusick, Dr. Scorin, working so hard to find a solution, but it's just not known. It's not being taught. And if it is, I hear people say, "Yeah, I heard about it when I was in school for occupational therapy." Yeah, they mentioned it for about 10 minutes, and then nothing. So it's not paid attention to. So that's what our aim here in the United States is. And I know Judith's goal is to change that. And again, God bless her. What a trailblazer she has been for Charles Bonnet. Very much so.
And just the word hallucination has such a negative connotation to it, where people are scared to even talk about it, and that can be tied back to mental health, even though this is not a mental condition, this is a medical condition. But that's very unfortunate. So I guess across the board, we have to just get people more comfortable about talking about hallucinations. When I first found out about Charles Bonnet, I typed in hallucination into Google, and I saw everything there: Parkinson's, dementia, and all the schizophrenia and all of the other things. But Charles Bonnet was listed there. So I said, what is Charles Bonnet? And then when I did the research and I watched some YouTube videos about it, I said, wow, my loved one has all of these symptoms and meets all the criteria. And then when I eventually told them about it, they said, no, I don't want to see any videos about it. I don't want to look at anything about it. But then eventually they came around and they looked at it and they said, wow, I have that. Wow, I'm experiencing that. And I'm glad that I was able to not be so negative about the fact that they were having hallucinations and be open to seeing what they could be from, and glad that I found out about it. And I'm pretty sure other people will, because of this podcast, because of the work that Jonathan's doing, that you're doing, Eva, that Judith Potts are doing. So yeah, we got to get more open.
The work that you're doing as well, Shimon, that the idea to do this podcast and to get the word out. And my mother was quite the same. She had already been given, unfortunately, erroneously, had been given a dementia diagnosis by an unqualified doctor who should not have been giving a dementia diagnosis, didn't even do an assessment on her at all. Just she was hallucinating in her office. Boom, you have dementia. That almost destroyed her. And it made her even more determined to be able to repeat her entire activities for the entire day. At the end of her day, I did this, I did this, I did this. People with dementia cannot do that. And it's very sad. And same thing, Shimon, my Aunt Rosemary Googled and Googled and Googled and Googled. And at that time, we couldn't, this was around 2016, 17, we couldn't find a lot of information. And when we finally did, all the information was from the UK. In the United States, everybody up to this point has had to go to Judith Potts to get sent to Gary Cusick, or over to Australia to get sent to Gary Cusick here in the United States. That's a long way to have to go to get help for your loved one. And that's what's changing. I know it's slowly changing. It's going to change. And Jonathan, I just want to say thank you for all your work and what the Thomas Pockington Trust is doing to help, because you all have set the standard for what we need to be doing everywhere in the world.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and you do a great job leading that group. And I know you work with others, but it is definitely not easy. And you're gentle, but you just do all the different things that you need to do to be able to meet the needs of the individuals. And that's not easy because everybody has different severity of Charles Bonnet. So I appreciate what you're doing. Is it okay if we told some people about your group?
Yeah, it's not unusual for people to drop in, as you know, to drop in from the States and Canada, and yeah, people drop in from all over the place from time to time to join the group and meet people. Yeah, so everyone's welcome.
Okay, we'll definitely let people know. And I believe it's on Thursdays around 1 p.m. Uh, New York time and about 6 p.m. London time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Okay, we'll
yeah.
definitely share the information about that. Yeah. So, is there anything you would like to leave the guests with, and I mean, leave the people with? Any parting words?
You're not alone, and you know, try and find someone else who's experiencing what you're experiencing. And if you do that, if you know what are it's an old proverb, isn't it? A problem shared is a problem halved, or something along those lines. I think just by sharing or just by listening to someone else, I think is a really good start.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yes. Did you have anything? Any last words, Eva?
I just want to thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for the information on your support groups. We can always, everybody can use as much support as possible. And sometimes once a week isn't enough. So I'll be sure that when our website has been launched, that your information will be on there, as well as Esme's umbrella, so that people know that there are people out there who are experiencing this. It's not just a local problem. It's a global problem and or condition, not a problem. It's a condition that if we start paying attention to it and we start treating it and we start respecting it, then we'll start to be able to find some answers. Thank you for hanging in there and for helping people with this. That is so important. Well, your work is just so important. If nobody's told you that, we're here to tell you that we are very fortunate that we have you, we have Judith. You all have set the standard here in the United States. Thank you for coming on, Jonathan.
That's a pleasure. Anytime.